Hello and welcome back to the BNEWS Election Center for another year. I'm your host, Chris Flaherty. Thank you for joining us. This year we're kicking off with the first of our candidate forums, and today with me is Nick Priest, just finishing up his first term on the select board and is now seeking his second term. Nick, thank you for joining me.
Chris, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So just to kick it right off, can you just give us a little bit general background on yourself?
General background, yeah. I am a lifelong Burlington resident, and my wife and I bought a home here about 11 years ago, raising our 4 kids. They are now going through the school system. I work in advertising and marketing, and about 4 years ago, I thought it'd be a good idea to get involved in town politics and run for select board. So here I am.
And that brings me to my next question. What initially inspired you to run for selectman, or select board as it's now known?
Yeah, initially, so 2 things, right? Initially, it came down to, wanting to give back to the community that gave so much to me, right? Growing up in town, Burlington offered so much, to its residents in terms of its services, and my family took advantage of a lot of it, and I felt like it was time. I was hitting a certain point in my life where I should be giving back to the community. 1, because the community gave so much to me, and 2, because I wanted my kids to see how important your civic duty and responsibility is at the local level, how important it is to be giving back to the community. And I felt like my skill set in advertising and marketing, was something that could be very, very useful on the select board.
And just general thoughts on your first term. I know a lot happened in these past few years. We had the Office of Economic Development instated. There was the new Fire Station 2, the new DPW facility.
Yep.
There was a certain disease that ran rampant through our community.
Wait, what happened? No.
But just thoughts on all the things that you and the select board had to tackle in your first term.
Yeah, you're not kidding. It was a very busy 3 years. And I tell you, nobody ever anticipates a global pandemic.
No.
We hopefully are prepared for emergency response issues, and I think the town responded very well. But obviously, I was not anticipating
Sure.
2/3 of my term to be mired in a pandemic. But our response, was, I think, very well thought out, very, very measured. The goal was to keep the town running and keep providing services for the residents, despite the fact that revenue was just drying up due to the fact that no one was doing anything.
Right.
So I feel good about our response in that regard. But you're right. We brought on an economic development director, Melissa Tatakalis, who's been doing yeoman's work, just amazing work. We passed a cybersecurity policy, right, to tighten up, security from a digital perspective in town. We got a remote participation policy passed, which, as we come out of the pandemic, as the emergency orders start to go away, we'll have that in place so that boards and committees will be able to continue participating, at least in a hybrid format, until we can advance that, forward. We are working hard on the water, getting the MWA brought into town. That's something that the board's been working really hard at 3 years. Obviously the fire station and the DPW buildings, huge wins. It's been an amazing 3 years. Also, transportation and infrastructure. We've been really starting to focus on and looking at that, and then starting the DEI committee as well.
Yeah. A lot of things you brought up that I'm looking forward to talking with you today. But you bring up a good point about cybersecurity. Like, everything's done through technology these days because of WebEx and Zoom and stuff. So it's really important we had that down. And then you bring up Melissa. It's sort of like we got her like right at the right time. Like, I think it was January 2020 she came, and then she had to go to work.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, her role she had to be very adaptable in that role, right? Because again, no one was anticipating the massive shift, but
Absolutely.
She did an amazing job, shifting and adapting to it. And you're absolutely right. Our operating budget, from a cybersecurity perspective, our operating budget grows every year, right? And we wind up looking like not an easy target, but a target that's got money, right? And I think that we're seeing municipalities come under attack, right? We're seeing certain pieces of infrastructure being held at ransom, right? And so the goal is to mitigate these as much as humanly possible, put as much infrastructure in place to reduce the probability, and then educate the staff so that people are on the lookout, right? Because I think that the attacks are getting smarter and smarter, right? And it's becoming harder and harder for folks to recognize it. I had been, we'll say victim. I caught on to it, but somebody had targeted me through my
Oh, wow.
employer. And it's only been through the massive amount of trainings that they put you through that I recognized it.
Yeah.
But it was very, very smartly done.
And you talk about how attacks are currently are constantly evolving and stuff. What are some of the biggest challenges do you see for the select board and the community going forward?
Yeah. I think getting from a cybersecurity standpoint, getting the right team up and running. I think all the directors have been absolutely fantastic in terms of getting on board, asking smart questions, starting to pull this into their day-to-day lives. The next step is having basically like an emergency response team prepared, because it's not if, it's when, right? At some point, somebody's going to try and attack the town of Burlington. When that happens, how do we respond? And making sure that each department has and is prepared for those kinds of things. Holistically, I think that the next 3 years for the select board is going to be about focused economic development. Right, we have a lot of projects on the horizon, as well as taking a step back and looking at things. I think even more strategically, right, and cohesively as a board. And I say that meaning we have a lot of things happening, right? We've got life science coming into town. We've got traffic at its all-time probably worst in town, right? We've got we've got the hopes for new municipal buildings on the horizon, right? And land is at its all-time, not only cost, but of the 11 square miles that comprises our beautiful town, we're running out of it, right? And so, I think we need to take a step back and say, okay, where are all the pieces, right? Because I think that if we don't position ourselves now, in 5-10 years from now, when we need something, we may be at a loss for it.
Exactly. Plan for tomorrow, today.
Exactly.
Yeah. I know DEI has been a big issue in town recently, and the select board just received an update from the committee. What do you see are the next steps for the board in applying what the committee found to municipal government going forward?
Yeah, for sure. So the committee's report, gave a couple of suggestions, a couple of which need to be fleshed out further, right? So the committee is going to continue working on creating language and certain things that can be presented back to the board that they can react to and respond to. And in the meantime, I'm hoping that the board would be willing to entertain more conversations around DEI, and choose to educate ourselves further into this. My wife and I have been attending the Let's Talk About It conversations that Ray Porch does. And I think that that's the trickiest thing, right? Is to make time to make this a continual conversation, so that we're just more aware, because it's less of an issue. It's not something you can put in a box, but more something that's woven through our lives, right? And how our personal experiences, how the personal experiences of others are all weaving together, on a day-to-day basis.
Right. That's a good analogy, taking threads and weaving them together.
Exactly.
That's a very well put metaphor. Excuse me. We talked about revenue and economic development for a little bit. Because of COVID, the landscape of retail and businesses is constantly changing, and so it's just consumer behavior in general. Burlington's been a big hub for business and retail in the past. How do you see us keeping pace with these changes?
Yeah, and again, this is why Melissa's role is so important, right? And why it was just great timing that we saw the shift coming and that the pandemic expedited that shift, right? So what we're working toward is diversifying, our stock essentially, right?
Yeah.
It can't just all be retail, and it can't be one thing, right? So we've had a consultant working with the economic development team and doing a lot of forums to talk about what we're calling the 128 district, plan, right?
Yeah.
And it's chunks of areas all down Mall Road toward Middlesex Turnpike, and the goal is to start to think of what we'd like to see up and down Mall Road, right? Those buildings are not going to fill back up the way that they were. And life sciences and our efforts towards bringing life sciences into Burlington is paying off for sure. Developers are going to retrofit buildings and make things prepared so that businesses can come. But I think that with the reduction of office space, with the reduction of need of footprint, and with the varied needs of life sciences, we're going to see space open up. And so, what other things can we bring into that that are going to help? And then just overall as a community, right? Like making sure that we've got a strong ecosystem here, not just from a, business perspective, but just holistically, right? When people are going to go out now, it's probably to have an experience, right? We're not just running to a store because there's, 10,000 stores to choose from, the convenience of ordering online is such that if I'm going to take time out of my day to go to a store, it's because I want to, be a patron of that store. It's because I want to have that experience. So those are the kinds of things that I think that we're really trying to focus on.
Yeah, it's all about supporting local businesses. We've heard that many times over the past few years.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember when you first ran, you were a big advocate for small businesses in the community, like potentially a hardware store in town, more mom and pop restaurants.
Yep.
How do we keep Burlington being like a welcoming environment for those types of businesses?
Yeah. The trick could get hard because the easy way out is to let larger businesses in, right? And and by larger business, it's like instead of having a mom and pop coffee shop, all of a sudden we've got 3 Starbucks, right? And we have to be careful with those kinds of things, right? So I think and this is part of Melissa's role, right? Like we say economic development director, but also tucked in there is community development director,
Yes.
right? Because it's not just about the businesses that are just happen to be going, oh yeah, Burlington, right? We want to make sure that we've got a wide range of types of businesses, right? And like I said, I think that like if folks are going out, residents who are working from home now, right? Their commute's gone, they can run out on lunch, right? So they want easy access to a hardware store, to a local coffee shop they can support, right? To these things that are, within proximity, especially for residents. The way Burlington is, as we all know, is set up is that a majority of our residents are on the northern side of town, right? And so to trek all the way to Middlesex Turnpike to get into all of that traffic is not, it's a headache, right? It's like, no, I'm good, right? Or I'll put it on my to-do list for Saturday and just make a thing of it, right? So, how can we, support the businesses up and down 3A, right? And really, bring that to even more life. And that was the intent around the Pocket Park.
Yes.
Right? It was, can we try a pop-up event that's going to get people to come out and then basically bleed into the shops in the area, right? And it worked, right? And so because anything that we do, anything that we hope for from a change in private business is contingent on the landowners and the private businesses and what they want, right? So when we talk about the Pocket Park, when we talk about reinvigorating 3A, it's not a government to-do list, right? It's more of a conversation with these landowners and with these private businesses to say, what are you comfortable with? Where can we take this? What are you hoping for, right? And make it a public-private partnership, right? And so, because we can't just, turn Burlington, Center, Burlington 3A into Lexington, right? Because everyone's like, oh, Lexington's great. We can walk up and down. The buildings are close to the street. The parking's where you can't see it, right? That just can't happen, right? Suddenly, but we can do pop-up events, right? We can bolster the area and make it even more inviting, right? And I think that's where we're going to hopefully see success in that public-private partnership range.
Right, so it's give and take. It's both sides working together.
Absolutely.
And we have these locations like the pop-up you mentioned, like that area has been revitalized. We have the sculpture park now, which has become a hub for certain events and stuff. And then, we have 3rd Ave, we have, the district.
Yep.
Which they're sort of like their destinations for shopping and stuff. And the mall has definitely evolved to adapt with that as well.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm glad you brought up land because that was sort of going into my next question. The town is just recently announced they're seeking to fill an affordable housing consultant, and I think they'll be working with the select board and other departments. Excuse me as I flip through my papers. Why do you think there's a need for that position, and what do you think Burlington's future affordable housing needs are?
Yeah. So this goes back to my need for strategy, because all of these things tie together, right? So we're trying to bring in more through economic development, right? The MBTA the state passed the MBTA legislation, which is requiring commuter towns to have more multifamily housing. Everyone's still complaining about traffic, right? So all of these things are happening, right? Seniors want to downsize but stay in town,
Yes.
right? And what the state deems affordable isn't, either people don't fit into that bracket, or what's deemed affordable isn't really affordable. So like we have all of these different pieces. Having somebody who's focused on that task, who can be the point person, right? Have the conversations, report back to the committee, and kind of make sure that everything keeps moving, right? Because don't forget, right? My job is that of a volunteer, right? And I'm not there during the day every day, right? And none of us are, right? So if I can't be there to help facilitate those conversations, having somebody there is a huge win for us, right? And housing in town is, again, another one of those pain points, right?
Yeah.
For the reasons that I mentioned and others, right? You want to have good, smart, balanced housing stock, right? Just like you want good, smart, balanced business, right? Because that ecosystem feeds, right? If you have nothing but, $1 million, $2 million houses, or nothing but apartment complexes, your demographics are going to skew, right? So how can we keep everything, as balanced as possible? And how can we be, to the point that you made, right? Making those, or having those conversations today for tomorrow, right? Because if we don't start having those conversations today, what's going to wind up happening is we're going to miss the boat.
Yeah.
And then legislation just kind of goes into effect, right? And then we have no control over it. And then, everyone grabs their pitchforks, comes out and says, why did you let this happen, right? So I think that if we can start having conversations soon, if we can have people in the right positions, it will hopefully afford us the opportunity to get out in front of things and make smart decisions today, so that when things do happen, we're already saying, yep, no, we planned for that. This is the best outcome that could be happening for the town, and not sitting back and going, it's out of our hands, and yeah, we're not happy with it either, but, so that's kind of the balance that we're trying to strike.
Very nice. Yeah, it's because Burlington's such a hub. Like, everyone wants to come here. Not people that just work here, but there's like seniors that want to downsize and stay in town. There's young folks like you and me that grew up here and want to stay in here. We want to keep it attractive and a fair landscape for everybody.
Yeah, and I mean, you raise a good point, right? When a business moves from Cambridge out here, right? Or, I mean, from anywhere to here, right? But let's just take Cambridge as an example. You've got entry level or junior level, we'll say entry to mid-level positions that aren't paying massive salaries.
Right.
And you've got folks who are scattered all throughout the Boston area, right? They could be living in Somerville, they could be living in Allston Brighton, they could be living somewhere that's relatively affordable on their salary, right? They can't just pop into Burlington with, an apartment.
Right.
That apartment costs a lot, that condo costs a lot, but they don't have a car. So moving out to Billerica or Tewksbury, where it's more affordable perhaps, is harder because now they have to make the investment of a car, which they weren't prepared to do. So do they just let the company move and then find a job still in the city where everything just fits their current lifestyle, right? Or can Burlington adapt in some fashion, right, to make it as attractive to the folks who work for the company as it is attractive to the company itself?
Right, and then you mentioned land, about like, do we have enough space for all these people to live and space for all these businesses to come in too?
Right, exactly.
So it's all about that balance, I
Yep.
see. We're always looking ahead to the future. We just had January town meeting back in February. We're almost done through March, and May town meeting will be here as before we know it. A lot of big projects potentially in the pipeline, new police department, maybe a new Fox Hill, maybe a new Burlington High School. How do you prioritize those projects going forward?
So, when it comes to projects that span committees, right, what I like to say is that it's important for us to be having, again, open communication, conversation, right? The big question when we talk about police station, Fox Hill, high school, any time you have more than one building at a time, in a conversation like this, right? The question is, well, how are we funding it all, right? Because the immediate, next question is, are my taxes going up? Are our taxes going up, right? So I think, when it comes to the schools, my hope is that, through the schools, and the state, the select board, planning, everyone that needs to be involved can be involved to make sure that, again, we're aiming for best outcomes, right? In terms of priority, again, that's a conversation for, us to have with the schools and say, okay, do we, and this is all hypothetical, right?
Yeah.
If we're going with state funding, right, and we can bond the police station, can we do both at the same time? And by same time, right, we're talking about, you can still stagger them by 2 or 3 years, and it's all still at the same time, right? How, like, what's the best path forward? That again creates the most minimal impact to the residents in terms of, not just taxes, but infrastructure, right? Because if we're building a new Fox Hill, if we're building a new police station, those are 2 areas where residents move through on a very consistent basis, right? Those are needs that residents have, right? Where are my kids going to be, right? While the construction takes place.
Sure.
If I need to get to the police, how do I do so? Right. So then we start getting on the topic of education, right, and making sure that as we move forward with, hopefully the best outcome path, that we have the proper communication and education around, how those shifts are going to occur.
Yeah. It's a lot more than just knocking down a building and then building a new one.
I wish it was that easy. I wish it was like, okay, we're good to go. Let's do it. But it's no. I mean, planning for any municipal building takes years, right? I mean, the fire station was talked about for years, right? It was in planning for years, right? The building of the building itself does not take that long, right? It's like a couple years and it's there. It's all the work that happens before it and all the conversations that happen before it to get to that one good outcome.
Excellent. Well, Nick, we covered a lot in such a short amount of time, but just to wrap things up, what are your goals? What do you hope to accomplish in a second term?
Yeah, I'm excited at the prospect of 3 more years, right? I'm excited to see, all of the work that we're doing now, right? How can we continue it and how can we keep moving it forward? For me, like I mentioned earlier, that strategic level of work I think is super important. I was something that I forgot to mention, but something that I ran on 3 years ago was communication, right? And the need for municipalities to kind of pick up some of the slack, and how we communicate with residents and make ourselves available to residents. So the board just passed a couple weeks ago a communications initiative, which is an initial phase research It's going to take 10 months, and we're really going to try to dive in to see where we can make improvements to how we communicate.
Right.
And then through that, how can we act on it, right? What are our next steps? What are our action goals? Because I think it's very easy to do that first part, right? Where it's research and okay, this is what we need to fix, but then actually enacting how we move forward. That's the real tricky part, right? Because now logistics become the enemy, right? So like really seeing through more economic development endeavors, working on communications, and aiming at strategy, all while doing all of the other things that we always do. I think are probably my top 3 things.
Awesome. Takes a village.
It absolutely does. And I think that here in Burlington we have a very strong village, and now the question is how can we make it even stronger?
Yeah, excellent. Nice words to end on. Well, Nick, thank you very much for coming in. Wish you luck on the campaign trail.
Thank you.
Folks, this has been the first of our candidate forums. I've been your host, Chris Flaherty. Stay tuned. We'll have more 2022 election coverage coming up soon. Thank you.